Perfect. So we are going to get into what those B notices are and what that means. So if you're able to be successful in prevention, you may not get these, but maybe you get that brand new client off the street and like, hey, I got this notice. What do I do with it? So B, why B? It just stands for backup withholding is what that means. The actual form number is CP 2100. So if the taxpayer identification number and name do not match, the IRS is going to issue that B notice, that CP 2100. And B at this letter at the end of it, just think backup withholding. But that's going to be the form number on it. You have a reference here that I just wanted to point out, IRS Publication 1281. It's going to describe to you how you handle those B notices. I mean, we're kind of touching on a lot of the surface of it and giving you some ideas, but this is going to give you an instant reference if you're like, oh, okay, now I've got one of these, what do I do? It basically, when they do these, they show up in the fall, but remember, it's always trailing. So I think about October is about when they send these out. So maybe October, November, you start getting some of these in the mail that goes out nationwide for all of the clients with the mismatches. So it's after the fact considerably. So 2016, we're going, oh, well, gosh, we're almost to the end of 2017. Now we have to deal with this. Stands for backup withholding, and it occurs at the moment the IRS says, wait, this doesn't match. We don't know how to match up this 1099. The name doesn't match, the ID number doesn't match, something's off there. And just in case, I did put a reference here in the slides that you can refer back to as well and say, okay, I got to go figure this out because now one of my clients has one of those notices that I didn't think I had to worry about. So what is it that we have to do? We have a first notice. The CP 2100, the first notice, means that you must request, and by the way, in writing is an important part here, correct information within 15 days from the payee. And they want it in writing. You can't do it like over the phone and say, hey, can you give me that correct ID number? It wasn't wrong. Nope, it has to be in writing, and you have to do it within 15 days. So that's an important aspect of that. If you don't get a response from the payee, so here it comes down to how are you going to prove this if your question all comes down to documentation, right? So you're supposed to send out the request within 15 days. If they don't respond, you are supposed to you're required to actually start that backup withholding, 28%, from anything you owe them from that moment on after 30 days. So it only really gives a 15-day window. If you push it all the way out to the whole, oh, I'm going to wait till the 15th day, and then that person has only 15 days to respond, and if they don't, you got to start backup withholding. So right away, one of the first things you're going to say is, how about they send out the request in writing on day one when they get it, so they have the whole 30 days in hopes that the payee is going to get back to them right away. Because if not, again, you got to start taking out 28% on everything owed from that moment forward. You can stop withholding if they get around to it. Maybe you took out for one payment and then 45 days later they go ahead and provide you the information. You can stop. If they provide you the correct information, you can stop the backup withholding, but you're not allowed to reverse what's already been taken out. You can't take and say, oh yeah, you got me the great, you got me the good information. I'm going to go ahead and pay that out to you instead of paying it over in that withholding payment. The moment it's taken out in backup withholding, it's backup withholding. You have to remit that in, or it actually becomes a trust fund issue, believe it or not. So these are why we try to avoid the dreaded B notice ahead of time, because if you have this happen and you don't have it instantly, I mean, you have to send out a request within 15 days and that person's got to get back to you in writing, right away, because 30 days out, you got to start this backup withholding. You won't be able to return it to them. You have to go ahead and pay it in. And what happens if you have backup withholding? Well, you report it on the 1099. If you were part of our Part 2, remember all those times we had boxes that said Box 4 withholding? That's those backup withholding amounts. You may think, when would I ever use that? But this is exactly that circumstance. So it goes on the 1099 on that Box 4. It goes on the 1096 where it has a summary for total federal amounts withheld. And then how do you pay it in? That's a definite question. You have a different form called the Form 945. That's what you use to actually pay in any backup withholding amounts. So the moment that you can't get correct information, you're now having to deal with that on the 1099s, the 1096s, pay in what you were going to pay your contractor or that, 1099 person on a Form 945. So this is what happens kind of as we get even just this first notice. Here's kind of the beginnings of it. So not only to make it more interesting, let's say that first notice wasn't enough to rectify it, and the IRS sends out a second notice. Sometimes that one's called a C notice, just generically, but let's say you get a second one. Well, then you have to again send the payee a letter requesting their tax identification number within 15 days. So that doesn't really sound like it's much different, right? And we're like, well, that doesn't feel much different. If they don't respond, then again, you are required to do backup withholding if you don't get a response within 30 days. But here's what's changed. You cannot, at that moment they give you correct information like, hey, here's my tax identification number. Sorry it took so long. You can't stop withholding. Even if they give you good information, you cannot stop your backup withholding until the IRS tells you you can stop. So that by the time it reaches a second notice, that's definitely much worse, because it doesn't matter if they give you the correct information. Now you have to start doing the backup withholding, and you can't stop it if they give you good information. So if you fail to take action required by the first notice, of course you're going to be responsible for the backup withholding. You may have to pay it along with penalties and interest, even if you didn't do backup withholding. So somebody that you maybe aren't paying anymore, that becomes a bigger worry, why we say prevention is our very best tool in this case. It's always in the best interest of the payer to do lots of documentation so that you're not maybe going to be held responsible for that. Document all actions taken in response to those notices. Do the backup withholding if required, because you want to make sure that you have that documentation so you're not on the hook for that maybe wasn't withheld. If you are registered with eServices, the IRS, there is a really great thing that we're going to touch in here next, and that is that you have access to something called TIN matching, tax identification number matching. Use that most definitely. So kind of going along still with these notices, if you fail to take action, you ignore the B notice, you ignore the C notice, you can be held responsible for the backup withholding. So this is not where you want to be. Even if you didn't withhold it out, even if, oh gosh, well, I've ignored and I've blown off the first notice and the second notice, and now I'm going to be responsible for this even if I didn't take it out. So that's why the documentation is so important. If you do that, you can prove that you made your best attempts and you sent out within 15 days that first one and they didn't respond, and you started backup withholding and they did a second notice and you sent out another request and they didn't respond. These proof of that is going to help to prevent maybe paying where you can't pay. Every action you take in response to that. Send out notices promptly. This is another preventive measure. If you happen to get one of those, send it out right away, because you want to have that extra few days time. And do the withholding if required, even though it may not be pleasant for the contractor and they may be a little upset. That is still something you got to do, and they can worry about getting it back later if need be from the IRS. The very best preventive measure, get that W-9 right at the very beginning of everything, and then use that TIN matching service, because what if that isn't right? Do you really know that W-9 is going to be right until a year or 2 years down the line when you get this dreaded B notice? Well, what about ahead of time? That TIN matching service is hugely valuable. So, as I mentioned, if you're registered for eServices with IRS, you can access this product. You can find out ahead of time if the information they gave you is right. So, I have a little a note here at the bottom, a link you can follow. Publication 2108A actually describes the program and how you can go about doing the TIN matching. So, hugely valuable, and it doesn't hurt if you have that you're set up with these services to be like, oh, it's our policy, we require a W-9 from everybody, and then we're going to turn around as soon as we get it and we're going to plug it in there and see if it matches, because at that very first moment in time when they're very motivated to get payments, you can clear up a lot of issues long before they ever happen. So that's why I'm saying I usually don't ever really have to deal with the B notices. We work a lot more in prevention, but every once in a while I'll have somebody, I do consulting for accountants too. I'll have somebody contact me like, oh, how do we do this? Or how do we fix it? How do we deal with this? So we know how to deal with it, but your best bet in your own practice to save the headaches later is just lots of prevention. So why not do eServices, log in and say, okay, does this federal ID number match this name? It'll come back yes, no. So pretty easy to know if you're on the right track.